Consider the clouds. Surely we can all recall a time when we gazed up at those white, puffy clouds and just been fascinated watching them as they drift effortlessly across the sky. Scientists tell us that even moderately sized clouds can weigh thousands of tons. How did our Creator design these clouds to both drift along in the air, but also allow their heavy contents to fall down to earth and land on his creation without harming it? We know that that cloud mass doesn't just suddenly plummet out of the sky, hurtling towards earth. No. Instead, millions of tiny droplets are formed, and they're steadily released to earth, one by one, and land on the daintiest petal of a flower with such little force. The petal hardly even moves, and the flower is unharmed. That's incredible, really, isn't it? What can we learn from very briefly considering then the clouds? Well, one aspect is this. If that's how our loving Creator looks after and cares for mere petals of a flower, how much more so will He look after each one of us, a faithful human, learning about Him and doing His will? So, of course, it's common in the world to say, yes, clouds, rain, but someone who regularly meditates would likely give thought to these kinds of things, and that would naturally move him to praise his Creator. Now, someone who did precisely this was the man, the King David. Let's take a look what he wrote when he wrote not only about creation, but also about all of Jehovah's activities. It's here at Psalm 143. Yes, David, he remembered, he meditated, and he kept considering all of Jehovah's activity. In fact, it was only by meditating he was able to see that connection between these things and Jehovah as a person. It's no wonder that the Bible tells us that David was a man agreeable to Jehovah's heart. And isn't really that the reason we're all here today? Because we want to be and to maintain that status of being agreeable to Jehovah's heart? Well, all of us can be, as we'll go on to see. This meditation that David did raises three basic questions that we'll look to answer this morning. How do we meditate? What do we meditate about? And what benefits will it bring? There are many forms of meditation. Many forms, but we could say there are basically two types. There's the type that's encouraged in God's Word, and of course the type that's not. But in this latter type, what is it that goes so contrary to the teachings of the Bible? Let's take a brief look. Have you heard of transcendental meditation? No wonder it's abbreviated to TM. Well, it's practiced by millions, and not only in Hindu communities, but these days by millions all over the world. It's said to produce physical and mental benefits, and what's more, many are convinced it has nothing to do with religion. But it's good to know what the New Encyclopedia Britannica says about TM. It says this: by pronouncing a mantra, that's a specific word or phrase, in the correct manner, it is believed that one may induce or even coerce the gods to bestow upon a devotee magical and spiritual powers. And regarding these compulsory ceremonies that initiate a new one to TM, it says particular items are brought by the candidate and placed on an altar, followed by chanting to holy men and numerous Hindu divinities. Magical powers, you must not practice magic. Items or idols, guard yourselves from idols. A pagan altar, you are to tear down their altars. Chanting to holy men and Hindu gods, it is Jehovah God he must worship. So TM is certainly not for anyone who wants to please our Creator, Jehovah. And besides TM, there are many other forms of meditation, including that practiced by millions of Buddhists in the world, that all prescribe a total clearing or emptying of the mind. Surely there can't be any harm in this, can there? Again, what does the Bible say? Let's take a look at the principle at Luke chapter 11 and verse 24 and 25. Luke chapter 11. With this state of being cleaned and adorned, healthier than it was before. Verse 26. So as we can see, a total clearing or emptying of the mind is an invitation to Satan. So all these forms of meditation are to be avoided by true Christians. So what about the biblical type of meditation? That's really what we want to find out. We have to find exactly what meditating is. It's defined as the kind of deep, concentrated thinking in which a person seriously reflects on past experiences, ponders over current matters, or thoughtfully contemplates possible future events. So when we understand then what meditation really involves, this reflecting, pondering, contemplating past, present and future, it's evident that it requires a very conscious thought process. Have you ever been driving, perhaps a familiar route, and as you arrive home, you turn the engine off, and you suddenly realise you've driven the whole journey and you can't remember making a single turn? What had just happened? You've been daydreaming. What about? You can't remember that either. The mind had just simply drifted away like those white fluffy clouds. Now, daydreaming has its place. It can be fun and it can be relaxing, not while driving. But meditating is not daydreaming. No. We need to maintain our focus and meditate with a purpose. Now, someone who had every reason to do just that was the only son that Abraham and Sarah had together, Isaac. We can learn a lot from him by considering just one verse, but noting the context. Shall we do that? As we do, let's note the principles involved to help each one of us to meditate with a purpose. It's here at Genesis 24 and verse 63. Genesis, the reason why Isaac was there, it was to meditate. That's why he was there. It says there as well that it was about nightfall. So evidently, the evening was a good time for Isaac to be alone in a peaceful place, to be alone with his own thoughts. Now, maybe you're not a nighttime person, maybe you're a morning person, or another time of the day. That's fine. The specific time of day is not important. What's important to learn is that Isaac sought out a quiet place to be alone with his thoughts. As it says there, in the field. What an ideal environment. He'd be in a relaxed state, free from interruptions and distractions. And Isaac, of course, didn't have all the distractions that we have today. Among many other things, we have an iPod, iPad, iPhone, iMac. I give up. There seems to be no end to the distractions that we face today. But if Isaac thought it necessary in his day to seek out a quiet place, how much more so should we? So what was Isaac meditating about? Well, the Bible doesn't say, but we do know what was going on in his life. Let's take a look. Turn back to Genesis chapter 13. Genesis chapter 13. And we want verse 2. Now Isaac had observed that his father Abraham had been blessed with much wealth, but he'd never allowed these material things to prevent him serving Jehovah whole souled. Was Isaac contemplating how he too needed to maintain a simple eye and resist that snare of materialism, him being the heir to his father's fortune? What else might Isaac been meditating about? Turn forward to chapter 22 and verse 9. Now, being in the line of the promised seed, Isaac knew that he must cultivate unwavering faith in Jehovah, just like his father Abraham did. No doubt, Isaac thought back to this time when Abraham was prepared to offer him up as a sacrifice. The Bible tells us that Abraham had faith that God was able to raise Isaac up even from the dead. Did Isaac contemplate it if he too would have had that same faith? By meditating on this event, how Isaac must have learned to always be obedient to Jehovah and always trust in his direction. And lastly, turn forward to chapter 24 and verse 4. So undoubtedly, Isaac would have been pondering his imminent marriage. As family head, he would have new responsibilities. Perhaps he was contemplating how determined he was to look after his new wife in exactly the same way he'd observed his father Abraham lovingly look after Sarah, his mother. We can see that Isaac had many things, many beneficial things to meditate on. But isn't that also true of us? We're living in the last days of this old system. Undoubtedly then, meditating on spiritual things does require some sacrifice. It's true. Is it going to be worth the effort? You wonder. Well, to answer that, let's look at why meditating on spiritual things is just so important. In this regard, we have some inspired advice from the Apostle Paul, and it's found here at 1 Timothy chapter 4. 1 Timothy. So a Christian's spiritual advancement will be plainly seen by all people as a result of them pondering over, or as the footnote says, meditating on these things. Which things? Quite rightly asked. Note verses 12 and 13. At the end of verse 12 there, Paul mentions speaking and conduct. So as we meditate on our own conduct, are there any adjustments that need to be made? The purpose is that we remain clean in Jehovah's eyes. And of course we want to become and remain a blessing and encouragement to our brothers. Why does Paul mention love towards the end of verse 12? Jesus said, you must love Jehovah your God. Yes, when we meditate on Jehovah's qualities and his dealings with his people, our relationship with him is strengthened. And of course, as a result, we'll know how better to love our brothers. Also at the end of verse 13, Paul mentions the very last word, teaching. So it's good to meditate on our own ministry. We could ask ourselves, among many other things, do I diligently follow up on any interest that I find? Always within a view to starting a Bible study. Am I a zealous proclaimer? What if my zeal for the ministry has just tailed off a little bit? Well, perhaps we could consider the people in our territory, how they need the good news. Or we could contemplate and ponder the urgency of the times that we live in. And finally, we'll look at the end of verse 13 as well. Paul says there to continue applying yourself to public reading. Let's broaden that to reading. How many times have we heard the advice, meditate on what you read? Once or twice, it's probably fair to say. So why is meditating appreciatively on God's Word just so important? Well, for two reasons. The first is that meditation helps us to assimilate or digest and absorb what we read and develop a heartfelt appreciation for it. So as we read the Bible, we don't want to be like those hurried tourists who rush from one scenic spot to the next. Have you seen them? They're taking photos of everything, but they're seeing very little and feeling nothing. We can illustrate this further with one of the works of Jehovah's hands, our flower here. And those droplets fall from the rain cloud and saturate the soil. But what would happen if the roots in the soil simply did nothing? Well, the waters would drain away and the flower would die. So the roots must take time to absorb the water for the flower to stay alive and grow. But the same is true of us. More is required than simply reading the waters of truth found in God's Word. We too must take time to absorb what we read by meditating if we're to survive and grow spiritually. We said there were two reasons why it's important to meditate appreciatively on what we read in God's Word, the Bible. The second reason is that it prevents us from forgetting Jehovah, his wonderful works, and the hope he set before us. Again, it's good to illustrate this. Consider the example of the Israelites when they were leaving the land of Egypt. We have a lovely summary in Psalm 106. Yes, the Israelites saw with their very own eyes great displays of Jehovah's awesome power. And he felt his loving support, his loving support as he guided them safely toward the promised land. Did this give them faith? Verse 12. Then they had faith in his promise. They began to sing his praise. Yes, it really did give them faith. But shortly thereafter, they showed a real lack of faith. Notice what happened in verses 13 and 14. But they quickly forgot what he did. They did not wait for his counsel. What was their problem? Well, they shifted their focus from Jehovah and the wonderful hope that lay before them, that he'd given them, to their immediate concerns, their fleshly comforts. They hadn't taken time to meditate appreciatively, so they forgot what he did. And sadly, that cost them their entry into the promised land. But we stand on the threshold of something far greater than the ancient promised land, God's righteous new world. Do we regularly contemplate our God-given hope? Do you see yourself in paradise? Picture yourself there, glowing with good health, free from all anxieties, being surrounded by people you love and who love you, being at one with all of the animals, and having truly fulfilling and satisfying work to do. Every time we meditate on our hope, it's like we're cleaning a window and we can see the reality of the paradise. Of course, if we were to neglect to clean that window, the dirt would soon come and that magnificent view would become an obscured unreality. So never would we want that to happen. With the onset of the Great Tribulation imminent, we know that momentous events are very, very soon to occur. We could ask ourselves, am I ready? It's true that here right now we live in peace and relative freedom, relative peace, relative freedom, but as the Bible reminds us, the scene of this world is changing. Events can happen so quickly and turn so swiftly that unless we're prepared emotionally, mentally, and of course spiritually, we could easily stumble. But meditating on spiritual things is one way that we can protect ourselves. So how has this talk helped us to appreciate the vital role that meditating plays in the daily life of a Christian? Well, we've seen that we mustn't get confused with the world's view of meditation. Instead, we've been reminded that we must set aside quality time to meditate on spiritual things with a purpose. And we've also seen how important it is that we meditate appreciatively on what we read from the Bible. Let's conclude by reading Paul's admonition found at Philippians chapter 4. Philippians. And how would we continue considering these things? You've got it. By meditating. And what would happen if we meditate on these things with a purpose? Notice finally verse 9. The thing, yes, the God of peace will be with all those who take time to meditate on spiritual things.